Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Black and Indian, a biracial woman, a vice presidential forum. I'm hoping folks are getting in the room. I'm going to start introducing myself and vamp, make some time while people get in the room, and then introduce our guests. My name is Kaifa Rowland. I am currently chair of Women and Gender Studies since July. I'm also an associate professor of anthropology. I've been at CU since 2006, but I'm very excited for my new role. I'm really interested in bringing issues of diversity and new audiences to women and gender studies. So I thought this forum might be a way to bring some people who might not normally come to the cottage into the place. So we're not physically in cottage, but welcome. My associate chair, Deepti Misri, and I began talking about this forum the day after Senator Kamala Harris was formally nominated for the vice presidency. While Senator Harris wasn't my first or second or probably even third choice for the Democratic primaries, I found myself unexpectedly crying at her nomination speech. As an African-American woman, descendant of enslaved Blacks of the Carolinas, I'm a Delta, member of the Divine Nine. I went to the real HU, Howard University, for my master's degree like she did. At the time, I don't know that whites necessarily understood some of the things that she was talking about in that speech, but they were beautiful dog whistles to us Black folks who had never seen ourselves represented in that way on a national stage. Even with our forever Ivy League first family, I had never heard anyone shout us out in quite that way. For those who believe her Indian heritage overrides her Blackness, she clarified how she identifies in that speech. She reminds us that Blackness is always and has always been mixed, and that she grew up in a time when we may have acknowledged multiraciality, but her 1960s upbringing was in a context of a Black and white world. Her mother celebrated her Blackness when the kinds of racism practiced by whites and Indians might have led her to do otherwise. I reached out to my associate chair, Dr. Deepti Misri, and we began having this conversation. I will let her introduce herself now, and we will continue with the panelists as we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaifa. Hi, everyone. As Kaifa just mentioned, I'm Deepti Misri, and I'm an associate professor in women and gender studies and also associate chair of our department and your moderator and timekeeper today. So a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in a Kashmiri Pandit family in the city of Bombay, India, known to many of you as Mumbai. And my work currently focuses on literary and visual representations of militarization in Indian-held Kashmir. And for me, having grown up as a member of the dominant caste in Bombay, the aspect that has been on my own radar around Senator Harris has been the sort of media reception of her as the first Indian American woman to get a major party's vice presidential nomination. And that is how she has been received. Now, this is a designation that, while eliciting a lot of national pride, in a context where Hindu majoritarianism and Indian pride have come to be dangerously intermixed, increasingly so. This is a designation that also usually glosses over two other aspects of Harris's identity, as Kaifa just mentioned. The first is the fact of Harris's Blackness, which is sort of conveniently left out or completely unmentioned quite often in this coverage in India, which is interesting and could only, arguably happen as a result of Harris's particular appearance. And the second, which, some of our panelists I think will talk about shortly, and the second is the fact of her upper caste lineage on her mother's side, which also comes to be glossed over quite often in the flat designation Indian American. Now, this is something that in fact happens in both Indian and American contexts. We won't be able to go too much into that context right now, but I just wanted to underscore that the significance of her nomination and the way in which it is received in different contexts varies according to the context, of course. And I was just sort of saying to Kamala that to Kaifa that if I had, if I had the sort of presence of mind, I would have said that, maybe we should name this panel Black and Brahmin and biracial women, because that is also part of her her heritage. And so this is something that I just wanted to underscore by way of just quickly marking that the discussions around Harris are quite different in these different contexts. Now, the bulk of our discussion today is going to be following the expertise of our panelists. It will be focusing on Harris and her positioning in an American context specifically. But we also just wanted to mark some of this, this backdrop as part of a larger global conversation that I'm sure you all can go out and learn more about. So I'm going to turn it back to Kaifa now to introduce our panelists, and thank you all for being here. We look forward to a lively discussion after our panelists' initial comments.
Thank you. The first panelist I'd like to introduce, and I'm going to let her start as soon as I finish introducing her, is Dr. Samira K. Mehta. Dr. Mehta is an assistant professor of women and gender studies and of Jewish studies at the University of Colorado Boulder. Her research and teaching focus on the intersections of religion, culture, and gender, including the politics of family life and reproduction in the United States. Her first book, Beyond Chrismukkah, The Christian-Jewish Blended Family in America, published by University of North Carolina Press in 2018, was a National Jewish Book Award finalist. Mehta's current academic book project, God Bless the Pill, Sexuality and Contraception in Tri-Faith America, examines the role of Jewish, Catholic, and Protestant voices in competing moral logics of contraception, population control, and eugenics from the mid-20th century to the present, and is under contract with the University of North Carolina Press. She's also working on a book of essays entitled The Racism of People Who Love You for Beacon Press. In her own words, Dr. Mehta says of her ethnicity, I do best when I'm getting to be an American person of color because it helps me sidestep expectations of Indianness that I often cannot meet, but that I am half Indian, half white, and Jewish. If I can get Dr. Mehta to say her opening words. Thank you.
So I wanted to thank both my chair and my associate chair for inviting me to be here, and open by saying Kamala Harris does not particularly appreciate the desire to put her in an when people try to put her in an ethnic box. When the Washington Post asked how she identifies, perhaps implying that she might pick Black versus South Asian or Jamaican versus Indian versus American, she informed them, I am what I am. I get this impulse. I'm here to talk to you today for a couple of reasons, mostly related to aspects of myself that I share with Harris or aspects of intellectual inquiry. I, like Kamala Harris, am half Indian. I've also written a book about marriages like Harris's, which is to say marriages between Christians and Jews. I'm somebody who is personally multiracial and who is writing a book of essays about multiracial identity. I'm also here to talk with you as a scholar of American religious history. So I'm not going to talk all that much about Harris's marriage, which is maybe the place where my scholarly background is most applicable, but I want you to hear that I not only have a blended identity, I study blended identities of varying sorts. So the first thing to get to is this issue of a blended half Indian identity. So unlike Harris, because my other half is white, when we talk about my racial experience in the United States, the other half sort of disappears. We live in a world with a legacy of a one-drop rule, which means that the skin privilege of whiteness disappears with mixed identity, though it's really important to note, and that I sort of put forward, that there are other kinds of privilege, inherited privilege, that do not disappear. And so what we might argue about, and what people do argue about, whether Harris is Black or Asian, and we would argue about these things because of how we read her face and her body, and because it bends our minds a bit too much that, of course, she is both. She's both all of the time. And so when we think about those arguments, right, that one drop rule legacy, I think, becomes really important. In the United States, in many ways, Harris is Black. And we know that Black identity in the United States has encompassed anyone who has African heritage, regardless of what other kinds of heritage they might have, what other things are in their family tree. Now, there are other people who have at times wanted to argue that she isn't Black, and they've based that in arguments, for instance, that her parents divorced when she was young, her father wasn't necessarily really in the upbringing picture. And so can a South Asian immigrant raise Black women? And we know that Harris does not appreciate that narrative. She rejects that narrative. She has made claims about her identity that are really important. And also her social location, right? So she attended a historically Black university. She articulates that her mother always understood that she was raising Black women. She was raised Christian and not Hindu. This is relevant not because you can't be Christian and Indian, you most certainly can, but because her own family is Hindu, right? And so in choosing Christianity, there was choosing to root her in a piece of African American experience. She went to church with a neighbor. So all of these pieces of her identity are important. When Harris steps out into the world, the nation is conditioned to read her as Black because we read mixed race people as Black if they are in part African. But, you know, we also need to talk about the ways in which we might read her as South Asian. So think about it this way. Senator Harris of California is, like Senator Barack Obama of Illinois, half Black, raised by non-Black relatives. Now, there were lots of conversations about Barack Obama during his presidential bid and during his presidency about how we might understand his Blackness. But no one ever sort of said, we would think of him as white, right? That is not the conversation that happened. And you do see it, a claim to call Harris Indian or South Asian, and an erasure of that Black experience. It's easier to make someone not Black if that doesn't mean making them white. And, you know, it's also because of how she looks, right? So from a South Asian standpoint, her hair, her skin tone, she's not only someone who looks like she might be Asian, but she looks like she's Asian according to South Asian, according to particular beauty standards. By South Asian standards, she's a relatively light-skinned woman in a culture that is very concerned about color and about colorism. She's someone who is a face of South Asianness that South Asians are proud to claim. And that's really tied very much to how she looks. So here's another thing that we might want to think about. Professor Misri flagged Harris's caste status. So one of the times that her Asianness comes up is when we're trying to explain how we think about this prosecutor, this top cop. And I'm certainly not someone who knows a huge amount about the legal system, but people suggest that it's because she's from this Brahmin a high caste status. In Indian society, Brahmins occupy a privileged space that would allow them to support the abuses of a police system for a couple of reasons. One of them is that they benefit from those abuses, right? Like if you're on top, a system that abuses people who are not on top benefits you, whether you like it or not, whether you endorse it or not. The other way in which that might factor in is that it might allow someone to believe in the ideals of the system, missing both the ways in which a system falls short of the ideals, right? So justice is not blind, it's designed in many ways to incarcerate people of color. And also the ways in which the ideals functionally serve to keep existing power structures in place. And again, this is not my area of expertise, but the way that I might put that from my background in religious studies is to say that justice is not mercy. So how do we read Kamala Harris as Asian, given all of these things, given the ways in which it might be important to her identity and her social location, but also given how she was raised and where she was raised? I want us to think about this in two ways. First, what does it mean to call Harris Indian? Does it matter how she was raised? Does it matter what she believes? In what language she swears when she stubs her toe, right? Are these things that matter? Is she not Asian if the answer is when she stubs her toe, she swears in English? And when we do that, we're moving between thinking about identity, which you might think about as like how she's constructing herself in her head, and her sort of and external things, right? So we don't necessarily have access to all of the things about how she's thinking about herself, right? But we know her racial identities, we know her nationality, we know her caste, and we know that those affect how she moves through the world. So, few things about that Asian heritage with my last couple of minutes. Today, Indian immigrants are the second largest group in the United States. That was not true when Kamala Harris was born. She was born in 1964, 1 year before the immigration laws would change, allowing Asians to come into the United States in great numbers, or in greater numbers. When Asians came into the country, however, when South Asians came from India, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh into the United States, this was not anybody. These were professional people. These were high status, highly educated, skilled immigrants. And so her caste is written in the very reality of her immigration. She would not have been able to be here if she were not from a high caste and high class family. Also, she has to be from a relatively unconventional family. Her mother came as a woman alone to study. This is not an option available. This would not have been an option available to every single Indian woman in the 1950s. This was not something available to my aunts, for instance. And so we know something about her family. We also know that this is not a family, or at least her mother is not a woman deeply dedicated to living a Brahmin life. Absolutely, there are going to be lots of things in their home that probably owed something to Brahmin sort of worldviews and assumptions about the world and status. But for a Brahmin woman to marry a Black man is suggesting that this is someone who's not super connected to or super in favor of all of the taboos of that society. So that's another way that this is a radical South Asian home. And I also want to say, and I don't know how much involvement this family would have had in a South Asian community in that moment. It's not a huge community. It's not a community that would have been deeply welcoming in the 1960s and 70s to a mixed race family, particularly a mixed race family with a Black husband and father. It's also not a family that is a community that is going to be very welcoming to a single mother with two half-Black children. So, you know, we can talk more later about what that means for Harris's Asianness and her Asian Americanness, but I want to point to all of these places in which it's a complex identity from the start. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mehta. I'm going to introduce our second panelist now. We're trying to keep these comments to 5 to 10 minutes right now, and then we're going to have them take questions shortly. Our second panelist is Bailey J. Due. She's a PhD candidate at the University of Colorado Boulder in cultural anthropology. She is my student. She is my favorite student right now because she's my only student. Her dissertation is based on ethnographic research with Black Creoles in the 7th Ward of New Orleans, Louisiana, and looks at questions of racial fluidity, generational trauma, critical mixed race studies, and American Blacknesses. The goal of her research is to produce scholarship that challenges understandings of race and interrogates the many ways in which we are taught how to race. Bailey is on track to finish her PhD in May 2021. I'm keeping her to that. And she's actively seeking employment. This is a flag right here. She's actively seeking employment with an organization committed to social justice, education, and advocacy. Bailey identifies as Black, mixed race, and Black Creole. Ms. Due, will you please give us your comments?
Yes, thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the organizers and fellow panelists and to everybody who's here today engaging with us. Looking forward to a really great discussion. And I want to start by introducing my background a little bit, and also a little bit of my politics. I think that's important to this discussion as well. So I'm 27 years old. I'm mixed race. I'm a Democrat, and I'm also proudly identify as a millennial. So the issues that I cared about for this election did not really have Biden or Harris on my radar during the primaries. And like Dr. Rowland, I enthusiastically am behind them now. I filled out my ballot the first second that I got it and dropped it right back in the mail. But when it comes to their policies, I'm not as interested in them as candidates. I want somebody to replace the current president, bottom line. I think like many folks do. My interest in Senator Harris is as coming as a race scholar and as another mixed race person and watching how she identifies herself and talks about race. And I identify as a race scholar, and I'm specifically passionate about race education and teaching folks about race so they can utilize their knowledge to act better to dismantle oppressive structures in their daily life. And primarily teaching at CU so far, that's meant mostly dealing with white folks and working through that conversation of white privilege to learning about the basics of race to learning how to implement decolonizing practices in their lives, anti-racist practices in their own lives. And so that's really shaped how I believe the race conversation needs to happen in our country, which I argue is a lot around education. Also being someone who grew up in the South, born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, went to school in Jackson, Mississippi before pursuing my graduate degree at CU. I've encountered some truly horrific curriculums on race. And so I think much of this racial moment right now that we're seeing and the disconnect that, at least to me, feels so jarring, I think is coming from a lack of education. And I know there are race scholars and activists who disagree, and that's completely fine. We have different ways of addressing the same issue. So I wanted to say that because I think that my identity as a mixed race person informs a lot of that. And when I teach race and discuss race, I use a critical mixed race lens to do so, which means I teach race from the center messy point of exceptions, because I believe, and I have tested this out in my own classrooms, that when we teach race, starting with mixed race people as the way to teach race, we teach race from a disruptive place that blows all of these socially constructed rules out. You can't sit and argue for a racial rule or a concept of a certain type of identity when I have an exception right here. And I think that that illustrates the subjective nature of race and also how it is a lived reality based on how our bodies show up in different structures. And so in thinking through Kamala Harris's identity, it makes me very excited in the way that she addresses herself, because I think it illustrates the fact that for many mixed race people, and not speaking for all mixed race people, but folks that I've talked to and myself, the identity is not one that we have the issue with. The identity is what others have the issue with. And if you've watched Fox News talking about Senator Harris's identity, you can hear the birther comments coming back up that we saw with President Obama during his elections, right? Is she Indian? Is she Black? What do these comments mean? And quite frankly, I don't need Fox News to try and define these comments for me to be able to tell you what it means to be a Black mixed race person. And I imagine for many mixed race people, it's a similar sentiment. And so I think also when we talk about Senator Harris's identity, I want to bring up the fact that these fragmented identities that we're seeing discussed now play very much into this idea of a tragic mulatto, that trope that mixed race folks, specifically in the South, were getting thrown into, that you are a fragmented person, that you don't have a whole identity, and that is completely false. And so I want to read very quickly The Bill of Rights for Racially Mixed People by Maria Root. She is a family psychologist who wrote these in the 90s. But this is where I take a lot of my pedagogical framing from when I teach mixed race experiences. It's resonated with me as a mixed race person, and I think it helps inform a lot of where my commentary is going to come from. So I'm going to take a minute to read that. And these are her words starting now. I have the right not to justify my existence in the world. I have the right not to keep the races separate within me. I have the right not to be responsible for people's discomfort with my physical ambiguity. I have the right not to justify my ethnic legitimacy. I have the right to identify myself differently than strangers expect me to identify. I have the right to identify myself differently from how my parents identify me. I have the right to identify myself differently from my brothers and sisters. I have the right to identify myself differently in different situations. I have the right to create a vocabulary to communicate about being multiracial. I have the right to change my identity over my lifetime and more than once. I have the right to have loyalties and identification with more than one group of people. I have the right to freely choose who I befriend and love. And that's the end of that piece. And I think starting with that for me and highlighting that shows that all of the remarks that we've seen from Senator Harris herself on her racial identity do not involve fragments. They do not involve partial fragmentations of the self. They are whole and they are valid. And we can have the theoretical exercise of understanding her identities and looking at how phenotypically she shows up in terms of class, and that, as a race scholar and somebody who looks at positionality is very interesting to me. But I think at the core, Senator Harris showing up in these whole ways is illustrating that for the mixed race individual today, these conversations, we are often not the ones who have the issue with being enough. It is the outside projection and reading of our bodies that project that onto us. And so I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you again to everybody for being here, and looking forward to the questions.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to introduce now our final panelist. Dr. Hilary Potter is an African-American, a descendant of US enslaved Africans, and a Black feminist criminologist and social scientist. She is the Associate Dean for Inclusive Practice in the College of Arts and Sciences and Associate Professor of Ethnic Studies here at CU Boulder. She holds a BA and a PhD in Sociology from CU Boulder and an MA in Criminal Justice from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice at CUNY. Dr. Potter's research focuses on critical analyses of the intersections of race, gender, and class as they relate to crime and violence. Her current projects include research on intimate and state violence against Black women and investigating anti-violence and anti-state violence activism in and among Black and Latinx communities, including a 5 years long ethnography in Ferguson, St. Louis, Missouri. Dr. Potter is the author of Intersectionality and Criminology, Disrupting and Revolutionizing Studies of Crime by Routledge 2015, and Battle Cries, Black Women and Intimate Partner Abuse by NYU Press in 2008. She's also editor of Racing the Storm, Racial Implications and Lessons Learned from Hurricane Katrina. I introduce now Dr. Hilary Potter, Dean Hilary Potter.
Thank you, Dr. Rowland. Thank you, Drs. Rowland and Misri, for inviting me to participate in this discussion. I'm looking forward to it. And my comments are brief. Senator Kamala Harris's identity and representation and nomination as Vice President of the United States signify the complex and diverse lived experiences of Black people and other people of color in the United States. While many Black women across the country have expressed excitement and joyfulness that a Black woman, as Senator Harris is sometimes referred, has been placed into a potential position that is one step away from the leader of the country, some Black women may not or do not see themselves represented in Senator Harris. From my non-scientific observations of social media conversations about Senator Harris, these Black women commenters expressed that Senator Harris's roles in law enforcement, as a district attorney and state attorney, and the emphasis on her sorority membership, among other identities held by Senator Harris, have not endeared her to these and other Black women. To be sure, this is the nature of our society, one in which middle and higher class Black people, and often lighter skinned and silkier haired Black people, are afforded greater access to professional and powerful spaces. And we do know the latter of that to be confirmed by research. Another distressing issue is the perspectives of Senator Harris by others in the general public who are not Black women. Of course, this includes white people. And I'm curious of how Indians and Indian Americans are receiving Senator Harris. And I've already learned a little bit, got a touch of that so far from Drs. Misri and Mehta. But I'm really curious about, and have been curious about, how Indians and Indian Americans are receiving Senator Harris in this new role or potential role. But let's talk a moment about Black men in particular. A recent survey conducted by the Public Religion Research Institute demonstrates the sad reality of perceptions of Black women, which frequently lead to disparate or dangerous actions toward Black women. The Newsweek write-up of the survey results relay that, quote, only 36% of Black men said that Biden's selection of a Black woman was a good idea, compared to nearly twice that number of Black men who said nominating a woman generally was a good idea. A majority of Black Americans overall were significantly in support of Harris as the pick, but that backing was driven overwhelmingly by Black women and not Black men. Black men are 10% less likely than both white women and Americans of all racial backgrounds to say they support a Black woman as Biden's vice president pick. So 10% Black men, 10% less likely than both white women and Americans of all racial backgrounds to support a Black woman as a VP pick, end quote. So I do not raise this matter to denigrate Black men or to suggest that Black men shall be wholly responsible for the challenges Black women face in our society. But I raise it to highlight the intersectional complexities in which Black women and other women of color, including biracial women, live, even for a woman like Senator Harris, who may soon be a stone's throw away from the highest political office in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. I'm going to start now with the questions that we received in advance, and we also see that there are some in the questions and answers right now. We'll see how many we can get to. We've asked our panelists to try to respond in about 2 minutes so that we can get to as many questions as possible. So the first question that was submitted in advance was, I'm gonna pose it to you, Bailey. Hypothetically, if something were to happen to Joe Biden, and to me this follows off of what Dr. Potter just said, if something were to happen to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris was to become president of the United States, what do you think her presidential term would look like? What would the United States look like in the aftermath of a Kamala Harris presidency? Do you think we would see similar outcome to what we saw with Trump after the Obama administration, or will we see more diverse candidates running for the office of president?
Thank you for that question. I want to back it up a little bit and talk about what I think this question means, not just if Kamala Harris becomes president, but what happens if Joe Biden is elected, which I hope is the case. Because I think that there's a lot of discussion happening right now about what it looks like if Joe Biden is nominated, given the fact that there are these dog whistles coming from President Trump right now, right? So we just saw with the Proud Boys during the last debate and some of these other moments that we've seen that have really put pause in folks, especially folks of color. And so I think when I look at this question, I back up to what happens if Joe Biden wins. And I think that in looking at and again, I want to say I'm not a political analyst, I'm not a political commentator, so apologize if I fumble over some of this, those political, I guess, hypothesizing. But I think that one of the ways that this comment, and that I think through this comment, is by looking at what social media is doing right now. And so one of the things that I think of is looking at the very popular app right now, TikTok. Which as a social scientist is a fantastic place to learn about a whole lot of different topics from individuals themselves, as just kind of an aside. But what you see when people talk about this, what happens if Biden is elected, it's done in very parodies, but one of the trends of the videos that's standing out to me right now is specifically Gen Zers talking about what happens if the race wars start and who they want to save in the race wars. And it's usually a person who identifies themselves as one race and says, okay, everybody, when the race wars start, I'm saving this person. And if you don't save this person, I'm switching sides. It's supposed to be satirical, but I think it illustrates this point and that there's a lot of uncertainty right now. And I think when President Obama was running, and certainly towards the beginning of his time in office, we saw, race scholars specifically, this was an interesting moment where we saw this narrative of post-raciality coming up. Okay, we have a Black president, we're over race, the United States is over race. And if you're a person who studies the United States, you know that this was wholly false and this was a myth that didn't last too long, but I think that it did enough of a damage in thinking through ushering in this colorblind racism rhetoric. And I think that if we look at how trends are going with multiracial individuals becoming the largest population of individuals in the United States in the next few years, combined with dog whistles that we're seeing from the alt-rights and white nationalist sort of landscapes right now, that this question of what a Harris presidency looks like or a Biden presidency looks like, and asking if something similar is going to happen, as did post Obama administration, where we see these swings to what some folks say are extremes after certain individuals are in office. I don't know. To be honest, the answer is I don't know. What I would like to see is, if Kamala Harris were to become president, I would like to see some of the policies that she has supported previously, those that have been criticized as being too leftist, sort of come up for more discussion. And I think to answer the question of, are more diverse candidates going to run for office, the answer is absolutely. And I think that to not pay attention to how the jokes made about mispronouncing her name or fragmenting her identity that you're seeing in some of these discussions from some of the senators who are trying to be reelected right now. I think there was one at a recent Trump rally who made fun of her name or mispronounced her name several times to try and get jokes. It's not cute and it's not funny. And I think folks are taking notice. I think we're past this moment of this being excusable behavior, funny behavior. And so I think that to many individuals, looking at how comfortable some of this very harmful, openly racist rhetoric is going to inspire more diverse candidates to run for office. Absolutely. So it was a little bit circumventive a way to answer that question, but I think the summary point that I want to make is, I think regardless of a Harris presidency, if Biden is elected, that this conversation on race and this concern for a shift or some form of violence to come out of that as a response from this alt-right group is a conversation that many folks are having. And looking at the social media versions of this coming out of different people, even in a parody sense, I think is getting the finger on the pulse for a lot of this.
Thank you, Bailey, for laying out that sort of the very complex stakes in this conversation. How we hold Kamala Harris to account for for her record, but also bear in mind the contemporary political stakes. So with that in mind, the next question is for Hilary Potter, and this was one of our pre-circulated questions. Hilary, we thought because you're a criminologist, like you would be the right person to pose this question to. And again, this speaks to her history as a prosecutor and her reputation as top cop. So one of our audience members asks, would you please share your thoughts on how this reputation intersects with the significance of her nomination for VP?
Thank you. It's complicated. That's what I would first say. Let's see. So I have so many thoughts with this particular question. Her reputation as a top cop, and then balancing that with her being a woman of color, a biracial Black woman, sometimes, as I said in my comments, sometimes just referred to just as a Black woman or African-American woman. It seems to fit with Democrats' attempt to cater to moderates, whether left-leaning or right-leaning, to have, and these are just speculations on my part, but perhaps there were some thoughts by the Democrats that her top cop reputation would soften her Blackness, and also even that her biraciality, her lighter skin tone would also soften her Blackness, and so that she would be more acceptable to many people. It's still complicated for many of the Black folks who were not supporting her in the primaries because of this top cop reputation. A lot of it often was coming even out of Oakland. It was anecdotal stories that were being shared by Black folks who were there that then spread, right, viral. And it was always the same talking points of things she did while she was district attorney, and then other things she did while she was the state attorney, that then other Black folks, and particularly in this era of the Black Lives Matter movement, are saying, no, that's not who we want. We want someone who wasn't in bed with those in power, who wasn't just going along with the policies in place that have or a system in place, a criminal legal system in place that has never been for Black people, that has never been, it's always been against Black people. It's never been to care for us. And so there are those different intersections. There's also the intersection. There was a, let's see, I think it came out yesterday, a New York Times, I think it was more of an op-ed, if I'm correct. It's called Kamala Harris, Mass Incarceration and Me. And the subline on that is, many progressives mistrust her for her past as a prosecutor, as an ex-convict, and also the son of a crime victim. I can tell you it's not that simple. And so that gets at my comments as well. It's that what I've often had conversations with over the past several years, and including the past few months with some folks, is there's all this around wanting to, for instance, defund the police and abolish prisons. And I'm all for, definitely, you know, we need to stop relying on a lot of that. But then what do we do? What is the solution when we start talking about those Black women who have been victims of crimes and violence? Oftentimes, because most crime is intra-racial, so oftentimes, and against women, it's often by men. So that means it's Black men who we're talking about, and so it's really complicated aspect of that, as far as if she was locking up, you know, because she did a lot of work with regard to sexual assaults. And so if it was a sexual assault against Black women, it was more likely to be about Black men. And so we need to think about that too. So what are we saying? Are we saying that we don't want Black women and other women to be protected from these violators? But it also provides us an opportunity as well. And I hope that if Kamala Harris does become the vice president with Biden as president, that they are true to some of the things that they've been putting out there about reform, about true, or just even not even reform, dismantling some of these systems and building up systems that are more about caring and restoration and transformation.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. I'm going to move to the next question because we're running short on time and long on questions. Dr. Mehta, I know I shared with you a question before about the possibility or how people might be interpreting her as the first Asian vice president as opposed to first Black. You can include that in your answer, but I want to add to that one of the questions that is now coming to the question and answer. So we can make sure we include as much as we can. Kamala, after all, comes from an upper caste elite background whose parents had Ivy League degrees. When we say that she's Indian, we don't talk about that. Her experience does not necessarily cover common people's experiences. Do we fall into the same trap of overgeneralizing in these questions of identity when we use her ethnicity or family's background? Why don't we talk about racial hierarchy here? Who is being represented?
So I think, you know, there are a couple of questions on the table there, right? So why might we not call her the first Asian vice president, or, you know, candidate on a major ticket? And one reason is potentially that we might not is in the distinction between Asian and Asian American, right? What are your sort of card carrying things that you need someone to have in order to be Asian? And there are going to be a whole bunch of places in which she's not going to have them because she is not herself an immigrant, right? So I don't know anything about her language skills, you know, but she certainly is Christian and not Hindu. She is certainly mixed race. She is certainly not someone probably who has like the ability to be a top lawyer in an Indian language, right? She doesn't have that kind of set of card carrying things. Many Asian American people, probably most Asian American people, don't have sort of the ability to pass as whatever their immigrant heritage might be, right? We don't necessarily also ask that of people who are Swedish American, right? Like that doesn't get in our way of that kind of identification. So that's one thing. One thing is that she's Asian American, she's Indian American, she's not Indian. the question of sort of particularity, you know, the person who asked the question was saying, like, aren't we overgeneralizing? She's got really specific locations. She does. And the way that you get at that is you talk about her family background, right? So it's not that we shouldn't be talking about family background. It's that family background, language group, these things are really, really relevant. They're relevant. India is a extremely culturally, religiously, linguistically diverse country. The food in different places is really different. She's someone with an immigrant heritage from a particular place that matters, and it's wildly different from my family's background, right? It's like as more different from my family's background than being from Toronto is than from mine, right? Like I'm a native New Englander. So that's those particularities really matter. How much they matter in her life is a complicated question, though, because Indian American communities, particularly in early days of immigration, were much more blended than you might have expected in sort of Indian society, right? So if you've got 30 Indian families in a given place, and this is not like true of the major cities in which she grew up, which include Montreal, by the way. We could also talk about formative years in Canada. You know, that's not necessarily the case, but it is in some ways that there's a lot of particularity in Indian identity. Some of that carries over into Indian American identity for sure. And in other ways it doesn't, right? Who are the other people around? Who are the other families? Are you in an Indian community that is predominantly North Indian, South Indian, might matter more than what you yourself are. And so I'd say it's some of both and, right?
Thank you, Samira. So I'm just monitoring the chat, as is my role here. And I just wanted to, I'll come to a question shortly. I also just noticed the latest comment by Ruth Ellen Kosher. Professor Kosher says, a consideration might also be her proximity to American enslavement. While she may be Black, as Obama was Black, they're not children of US enslavement, as my partner puts it. So I was reading from Professor Kosher's comment here. Thank you all for participating in the chat. We're trying our best to monitor, and I'm just trying to select a question to throw out to everybody from here, in addition to the questions that we've already received. So I think next, what I'll do is kind of open this up for the panelists in general, and you all can speak briefly to it if you like. Somebody asked a while ago, what can we do as individuals to make political or leadership positions more inclusive? And based on the conversation that you all have, I think, pointed in such a nuanced way to the fact that inclusion is not enough, right? You've pointed to Senator Harris's very compromised history as a prosecutor. We all know about her stance on fracking and the assurances that she's provided on plate. We all have sort of read about her stance on the question of Palestine. So given all of that, I just want to kind of add to that question, what can we do as individuals to make political or leadership positions more inclusive, but also beyond inclusion, what is our charge? Anyone who wants to go?
I can start. I think a lot of it has to start grassroots in our local communities. I think that's a good place to start. My husband and I were just talking within the past couple of days about our city council rep here in Denver for District 9, Candy Sedabaka. And she's doesn't have the typical background. She doesn't have the law degree. I'm not sure of her, what her aspirations were about going into politics. She self-identifies as a democratic socialist. She's done very radical things. She actually helped push the city, the rest of the council, to get them to vote last year to to defund the private corrections corporations for the ones who own the halfway houses here in Denver. And then we had to figure out after that, like, okay, oh gosh, now what do we do with these halfway houses, right? But supporting her. And so when my husband and I were talking about Candy the other day and about, well, what's her trajectory? Where is she going from here? And my husband said, well, maybe she can run for mayor next. I was like, no, we need to get her up, running for US Congress, a Congress rep or something like that. And so just as a concrete example, I think just the amount of power that we can have starting from our local communities to put people in place who don't look like what the US Congress looks like, or even for bigger cities, what the top politicians look like, and then support them in moving on up through that, through the ranks of politics.
And if I could add to that, I think it's really important in some ways that one thing that we remember is that often when you are electing somebody, it sounds like not in the case of Dean Potter's representative, but often what you are doing is you are electing your opposition. You're electing the people that you're going to protest. You're electing the people that you're going to petition, the people that you're going to try to hold to account. And so in some ways you're thinking like, in the world of people who I'm going to hold to account, who do I want to be dealing with? Right. And I think that's really important when, Professor Misri, you brought up a huge host of issues, right? Ranging from the top cop to the stance on Palestine to sort of just like a host of the fracking. What you're doing is you're saying like, who here can I get traction with? Who here can I persuade to go in the direction that I want? And I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind, that representation and a diversity of views are really important, and that can be physical diversity, right? But if you're not getting the range of intellectual diversity that you want, you can pull. And the question is, who do you think, if you pull, who do you think you're going to be able to move?
I think to chime in on that, and also I just saw, Dr. Rowland, your message that somebody asked for the reference that I cited in my opening statement. I will post that to everybody after I finish speaking, so I'll send a link to that. To go along with those, I think one of the things, and specifically I've been keeping track of many of the Southern elections that are happening right now. I'm in Memphis currently, and I've been watching a lot of the Southern elections. That's where most of my family and friends live. And so that's been really interesting, as the South is typically known as this very Republican territory. And that is not the conversations that are happening right now, if you've been following any of those elections. And so one thing that I will say is the question that's coming up now, or the comment that's coming up now, that I've seen a lot from younger Southern Democratic voters, is we have to look at who is comfortable in these positions and who has made a career out of these positions about being complicit in these structures. And when we find individuals who have been in these structures, these career politicians, folks who have not made changes, not held promises, not engaged with those who that are being protested, not taking these concerns seriously, it's time to remove them and put somebody in who will. And so I think not just looking for differing ideas, but looking for people who are still interested in having those conversations, interested in having dialogue with debaters and with protesters, and interested in addressing the issues that their communities and constituents are facing, regardless of how long they've been in that position. Are they still open to those conversations? So to add that piece on, and I'll post that resource now.
Thank you all. We're coming to the top of the hour, and there's still a lot of questions in the questions and answers. I don't know if any of you panelists have had a chance to take a look at those questions, but what I thought I would do with these last 7 minutes is maybe see if you have any last comments, and those could include some of the questions from the Q&A, or just having heard the conversation that you've had here with one another, anything that you want to just close with. Want to start, Dr. Mehta?
Sure. I saw a couple of questions in the chat that I thought were interesting. One is a question about sort of the general Indian response to erase Senator Harris's Blackness. And, I think it's really important to acknowledge that Indian society, Indian culture has a lot of anti-Black bias, and that shows up sort of in internal politics of color, right? Like the lighter you are, the better. In sort of in all sorts of ways, marriage market, whatever. And also the immigrant communities often pick up the racism or the prejudice in general of the societies to which they move. And so it's hard. I think that you have to think about this in terms of anti-Black racism and not sort of people of color solidarity in some ways and having conversations. So I wanted to flag that. I don't have any wisdom about it, but I would say, like, when talking about my own background, that's part of why I'm saying, like, it's really different. It's not great to be half Indian and half white in terms of like getting on with the Indian community. It's a lot better than it is to be half Indian and half Black in terms of getting on in those community structures. The other question that I wanted to quickly touch on is a question about how relevant Harris's caste is in the United States and in the context of the United States. One question is, how do attitudes that she has picked up from her family, consciously or unconsciously, shape her worldview? Hard to know that. She probably, like, it would take years of psychotherapy for her to know that, maybe, right? Like, it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to get at. It's probably relevant, though. I think my impulse is that it's relevant. The other answer is how relevant, and part of the reason that I say that ties to the other question, which is how relevant is it in sort of Hindu American, Indian American social spaces? And what I will say is entirely anecdotal. I am not a scholar of Indian American culture. I am from a relatively high caste family, and I grew up with no awareness of caste at all, except knowing that fact. I actually cannot, for instance, pronounce the caste that I am, which is why I'm not telling you. And I do not know whether that is because caste was so irrelevant in the social circles that I traveled in that we didn't talk about it at all, or whether it's because it was so relevant that I was existing in almost single caste environments where it didn't come up because we were all the same, right? Looking at it from the outside, I can't say which of those realities it was. And so I can't say, in parsing my attitudes towards what it means to be Indian, whether caste is central to my experience or irrelevant to my experience. I can't speak for Senator Harris on that, but I think that it is true that it is different to be Indian American than it is to be Indian in those ways, but that difference does not make it irrelevant.
Bailey, do you want to have your wrap-up comments, and if there's anything that you saw in the chat that you wanted to address?
Sure, I think I pulled a few comments. I also saw that someone said the chat is disabled. So for folks who can't see the link that I posted, if you type in Bill of Rights for racially mixed people into Google, you should see Dr. Root's resource pop up there if anyone couldn't see the link that I posted. The question that stood out for me, and there was actually two, but the first was, do you think the inability to put Senator Harris in one box, her multiracialness, helps or hurts her campaign? And then the other question that I want to speak to that I think is related is, I've read that our 21st century version of the one drop rule, again in quotes, results in assigning mixed race individuals to their lower status parent group. What do you think about this claim? So I think these questions are related. First, in the United States, the project has always been about protecting whiteness, as white men designed this system, and that was their goal. The project was protecting whiteness. Many of the ideas we have in our society today about the social construction of race is based on that project, whether we want to name that or not. And I think when you look at research done by social scientists that are calling out the structures that we see and how harmful they are to specifically Black folks, but all people of color, we're talking about structures that were designed by white people for white people. So let's be very clear. Yes, those harmful old ideas of race are very much there, which is why we're still having the conversation over mixed race people in fragmented ways, right? Are you X identity enough? That is a project of whiteness to police racial groups and understandings of race. So does her multiracialness help or hurt? I guess that would be a question for the individual voters. But the facts are mixed race or multi-ethnic individuals are the fastest fastest growing group of Americans in the United States right now. As we have more, and also to point out, Loving v. Virginia, the Supreme Court case that ruled interracial marriage to be legal and that ushered in what some scholars have called the biracial baby boom, only happened in 1967. And so this surgence of mixed race people that many researchers are pointing to is a result largely of the legality of mixed race people. They've always been around, but now it was legal. So when we talk about mixed race people and identity, we have to talk about it in the United States in keeping the white supremacist structure that created this country and that's been governing this structure in mind. When we talk about her identity, as it relates to Blackness, which is where my own research looks at Black mixed race individuals, it gets more complicated because as different racial groups have different things that are important or influential in their lived realities, their everyday life, those conversations shift. And so to look at Senator Harris and to have a conversation with her around Blackness has to also discuss phenotype, has to also discuss colorism, has to also address structural inequalities that exist within this white supremacist structure that we live in that privileges different types and phenotypes of Black looks. So it's very important to also, while we're having this conversation of mixedness and celebrating that and saying that, yes, she exists as all of these identities at once, we also need to make sure that we're looking specifically at what in those ethno-racial contexts those conversations look like so that we're representing those conversations in authentic ways. And I know we're running out of time, so I will stop my comments there.
Let me get Dr. Potter to see if you got anything in there that you want to address, or if you just want to summarize.
Okay.
Vote, but please go ahead.
Bailey, I pulled out the same two questions, exact same two. So as far as the one drop rule results in assigning mixed race individuals to the lower status parent group, that's generally true. Race scholars generally talk about that. The only complications that you have to think about is if the two races, if neither of them are white, then what is that status? What does that hierarchy look like? Eduardo Bonilla Silva, a sociologist, race scholar, talks about this and talks about how most Asian Americans are honorary whites. And so many Indians and Indian Americans would fit within that. And so, yes, with the Blackness would, I guess, I was gonna say pull her down if we're thinking about it on a hierarchy, and more so denigrate her. And then that is Blackness as well. And then the inability to put her in one box. I don't, honestly, from the commentary that I've seen and all the news I watch, it feels like the majority of the time folks are not identifying her Indian heritage or her Indian American heritage. They tend to identify her as sometimes they'll say woman of color, but they'll say Black woman. And so it seems like much of the commentary out there just it's kind of putting her in the one box of Blackness. And not identifying those other pieces, and particularly if they start talking about her being a graduate of Howard University, her being a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, one of the historically Black sororities. And I don't think because she is, because of her Blackness, even because of her Indianness, or a combination of that, and then throw in that she is a she, I think that we wouldn't be able to maybe discern what it is about her if people are going against her, unless they were particularly explicit on some of their comments. Thank you.
Thank you. We have reached the top of the hour. I'm going to dismiss Dr. Misri. She's actually got class right now. So thank you for hanging out a little bit beyond the time you were trying to be here. But we wanted to make sure that we thanked our panelists, first of all, but the last word to make sure that everybody in our audience who is a US citizen, who is over the age of 18 or older as of November 2nd, to please vote. I want to say I don't care who you vote for, but I'm going to give you a hint of who I want you to vote for. So please vote. Thank you, Dr. Potter. Thank you, Bailey Dewey. Thank you, Samira Mehta. And all of you, thank you in the audience. Have a good evening.
Thank you all so much.
Vote, vote, vote.